Hello, everyone, and welcome to enVision Together, going to our next level of best. I am so pleased and happy to introduce to you our guest for today. You can see her book right behind her there. But before we get into all of that good stuff, we would like to have her go ahead and share with us about who she is in her own way and a few little hints I've given to help us know a little bit more about who she is. So we have Phyllis Leavitt with us. And welcome, welcome, welcome. Please tell us about yourself.
Well, thank you so much for having me here with you today. And I'm really delighted to be able to have a conversation with you. My name is Phyllis Leavitt, and I was born in New Jersey. And I had well, I'm the middle child. I have a older brother and a younger sister. And I grew up in a family that was kind of, I would say middle class.
Mhm.
And not high middle class, but very devoted to education. So education was always a really big part of my life, and I actually really loved being a student. And I loved learning, I loved reading, and from a very young age, I loved writing. So probably not surprising that in addition to becoming a psychotherapist later, in my adult life, I've always been a writer. I kept journals, I wrote little poems and pieces, and then finally have written several books. But um, yeah, I grew up in New Jersey. I went to college in Boston, and I was a Vista volunteer in New York City in Spanish Harlem when I was young. And I worked in the American Indian Project in Arizona for a little while. I worked with migrant children. I just always was drawn to working with children and sort of being of service. Um, Got married. I had three little children when I kind of started remembering some of the trauma in my own childhood and did a lot of therapy and a lot of healing work and left a dysfunctional relationship. Was a single mother for a really long time before I remarried into a healthy relationship. And then kind of wrote my books. The first two books that I wrote were really about my own healing journey and my own inner connection to guidance. And this last book, American Therapy, is really about how could we bring the best healing principles of psychology to national conversation and help heal our great divides and escalating violence and oppositional opposition instead of like uniting. So that's my present commitment is really trying to bring what I've learned into a greater sphere.
Well, that's great. Well, with that introduction, again, thanks for telling us a little bit about your like early background and then leading us up to what you're doing now. That's always good to know. And you touched on some things that I think is why we agreed that we might do a great episode together is that we share this interest in wanting to bring people together. And I like that you're doing it from the angle of even therapy. So let's
Right.
let's jump in a little bit more. I want to dig a little bit deeper. Can you tell us about maybe a pain point in your own life that you think may have caused you to write your book, America in Therapy? Um, what are the signposts that kind of even took you to thinking about these things? Because I find that it's almost like a calling. It's something that happens in your life
Right.
and in your own experience
Right.
causes you to ponder things in a certain way that gives birth to books such as this. So,
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a great question because, I grew up in a generation that really didn't talk about psychology or family dynamics or trauma or any of that. I think I was a post-World War II baby, and
mm,
I think everyone just wanted to forget,
mm,
the horrors of what had happened. And psychology just wasn't a big issue in my life growing up. So I had no understanding of any of that. And all I knew was that something was deeply disturbed inside myself,
mm,
that I, never felt like I belonged. I felt really alone. I felt like something was wrong with me, but I didn't know what it was because I had no memories of early childhood trauma. I had really buried everything. So all I knew was that I just was kind of uncomfortable inside my own skin. And then so I'll tell you this. So when I finally went to therapy when I was in my mid 30s,
mm,
people were starting to talk about therapy. Some of my friends were starting to go to therapy. And I was really in such a dysfunctional marriage, and my life was just falling apart. And I had three
mm,
little children.
um,
And so I decided to give that a try. And I went to one session, and I don't remember exactly what I said in that session, but what I do remember is that I immediately went to the library and I took out a book on psychology.
Mm,
And the first thing I read was about our early childhood conditioning, having everything to do with how we feel about ourselves, the coping mechanisms that we develop, our beliefs about ourselves and other people.
mm,
Um, and what we think the expectations for success or failure are, and how we resolve conflict or don't resolve it. And it was such an eye opener for me to understand for the first time, because no one had ever said this before, that our early childhood conditioning has so much to do
mm,
with the way we function and feel about ourselves as adults. And so that really opened up that world for me.
mm,
And so I was willing to kind of dive into the pain that
mm,
I was carrying in therapy because I really wanted to heal. So
mm.
that was it. It was really having my life fall apart, which I think is the true for many people. Like when things are really bad, then you look for help, you know.
I can certainly relate to that. I've had things happen in my present, and I was aware that my response to it was a little bigger than it should have been.
Right,
And that's how I began to question and say, okay, what's going on? Because I view myself as a strong person. So why is this thing shaking me up this much? I knew that something was wrong. So in my own questioning, um, that's how I began to realize that things were happening that was triggering me
right.
to past trauma. And that so in the present, I wasn't just wrestling with the issue at hand, but it was like the issue at hand plus this other undealt with thing.
And
So,
that's very insightful
mm,
comment because that's really true. It was true for me. It's true for most people that I've worked with that have unhealed trauma
mm,
because it doesn't go away. And
mm,
then something triggers it in the present, and it's what's going on in the present, and everything bubbles up from the past. And sometimes it can make you feel a little bit nuts
oh, yeah.
because you don't know why you're having such a strong reaction to something that might seem little.
Hmm.
Um, and along with that, I know that something that I really noticed when I was younger was then my reaction would seem out of proportion. You know, how I was behaving would even seem out of proportion to what was going on, but I couldn't stop it.
Hmm.
And it made me feel kind of out of control and like, what's going on with me?
Yeah. I can relate to that. Now, is there something about maybe the trauma you experienced in your youth? Is there, can you give us a little hint or insight to what it was you were wrestling with?
Yeah, it was buried memories of sexual abuse when I was really young. And I think it was so traumatic that I just blocked it out. And then when it came back, it was painful. It
Yeah.
was difficult.
I didn't realize that yours was that topic, but that was the same for me.
Uh-huh.
Uh-huh. And then so I gotta say though that the events that I was facing in my present, so to speak, when I was an older person, like because I did a lot of this work in my 30s as well too.
Right.
Um, they were big events. It was like the loss of my brother,
Mm,
very, very severe circumstances at work, not mild, huge, like this happens to people. And so it weren't small things, but it still was, my response was still much larger. And like you said, I felt like, am I losing my mind? What is going on? And
hmm
that's, but now I kind of appreciate that experience because it illuminated or helped me remember or try to start remembering that I
Right.
have stuff that I have to deal with so
Right.
I can move forward in a better way.
Yeah, and for me it was really big too. I mean, my marriage was really dysfunctional and very hurtful.
Yeah.
And what happened, I think what happened was trying to deal with that also helped me unearth more of the memories of what had happened before,
Mhm.
because it's not that what was happening in the present was little, it was big and it was painful,
Mhm.
but it was also so triggering of a deeper level of pain that I didn't have coping mechanisms because my coping mechanism was to repress and bury what hurt me. And that doesn't work after a
Yeah,
while. You just
true.
can't repress and bury. So I think that was part of the trauma of that time of my life in my 30s was that I didn't know how to cope. It
Mhm.
wasn't just what was happening. It
And
was
what you touched on is so important. You mentioned it earlier too when you were introducing yourself and telling us about growing up. Um, we went through such a time in, I don't know, society when it just wasn't, you don't talk about things. You don't,
right,
you brush it under the carpet. We didn't know
right,
what damage we were doing to ourselves.
right,
And and I mean, we're talking about our generation, but our parents, it was even worse.
right.
Like,
Right. They couldn't talk about anything, and they didn't want to, and that's okay. That's what they learned, you know.
exactly.
But it doesn't work, and we know, you know, I know for me it really didn't work, and I'm grateful for having become a therapist because I think making a safe space to help other people open up and talk about what they hold inside and feel ashamed to talk about or scared to talk about is really a great gift. And I know it was for me as a client to have a safe place to just let that stuff really come up and come out and get reprocessed and worked with.
Yeah. And you said something else that was really, really important. And then I'll move to my next question, but you said a lot. It really stood out to me when you shared how you were going through such a process while you already had children. And it just makes me think of whoever we are and wherever we are in life. And this is not like a blame game because me
Right.
too, I had a child while I'm wrestling with a lot of my issues. They are going through it with us. And
Absolutely.
so we have to really try to become better so that we can make their present and their future better by having a whole person guiding them through life instead
Right.
of someone who's still very, very broken.
No, I think it's a really good point, and I think it is really important to take it out of the blame and shame because when you're wrestling with trying to heal something really big inside yourself and you're trying to just function in ordinary life and parent, and I was pretty much a single parent even before I got a divorce.
Mm.
Um, you know, inevitably don't do that great of a job, and your children do experience some of your trauma with you in, you know, not necessarily word for word, but they
But
experience.
indirectly, sort of.
Right, indirectly. And, you know, I've done a lot of work around that with my children who are now adults, you know, talking about it. And, um, you know, it can be a beautiful thing, you know, because I've worked with a lot of people whose parents don't want to talk about anything that happened that wasn't particularly healthy. And I think it takes a certain amount of vulnerability to really just own, you know, if I could go back and do it now, I'd do it differently, you know.
Yeah, it's true. I've had the similar conversations with my daughter. Um, you know what? We show up doing the best we can. And it's like you said, our parents learned a certain way, and it's not their fault because that's the way things were done. That's kind of what was ingrained in them. So, and then I also learned a lot about even forgiving previous generations because here I am old enough now to see the mistakes I've made even
Right.
though I didn't try to make those mistakes.
Right.
So,
Right. Totally.
but
Totally.
so we'll go to our next question and go a little bit deeper. So during the previous conversation, you told me that there's a disconnect between what we want for ourselves and what we do to others. Will you expound on that idea?
Yeah, and I think that's all that really connects to our own individual psychology because what I've seen is that when people have big unhealed wounds in themselves, they inevitably act them out somewhere, even if you don't want to, even if you don't intend to. You know, a good example would be someone who, you know, had really, you know, grew up with depressed parents and didn't have a good social network and didn't know how to make friends and felt left out. And then they get into, I'm thinking of a client of mine who then became a manager in a little office. And
Mm,
she did exactly the same thing that was done to her. She left people out. She didn't give people praise for the work they did because she was projecting onto other people the wound that she had felt herself.
mm,
And that's a normal outcome for an abnormal situation or conditioning that she received. Is it good? No. I mean, it was upsetting for the people that worked for her.
mhm,
Um, but what I noticed was that when she worked on her own wound and her loneliness as a child and how much she had felt left out, she immediately saw what she was doing with the people around her and started to change her behavior. So it's really that healing that we can do on ourselves that will allow us to treat others in a way that's much more in alignment with being loving and valuing and inclusive and affirming. And so the disconnect that I see in our society is that we have a lot of wounded people who
mhm,
have not healed
mhm,
and who have then justified their behaviors. Because basically what we do is, when before she did her own work, she would, I don't like that person, so I'm just not going to tell them good things about themselves. So she justified
yeah,
her behaviors, and that made sense to her.
mhm,
And we do that as a culture. We justify marginalizing certain people or
mhm,
targeting them for violence or abuse or jail or
mhm.
whatever we do because we haven't owned our own wounding and healed it.
That is so important. I like the way you've been able to connect that. We connected in a personal way, but I got to tell you, until having a quick chat with you, I never looked at it on a large scale. Like
Right,
not just Pamela or an individual or another person, but as a American society or as a world. I
right,
never took it to that scale and talked and thought about how trauma in a nation or trauma around an experience,
right.
a group experience, how that's being played out in a societal way. So um, I know that you mentioned to me previously that war is a mental health issue, and we touched on
Really?
the micro to macro concerning these things being interconnected. So, again, will you please share and expound more of those ideas?
Yeah, I mean, basically, what I've learned as a human being in my own life,
Mhm,
and certainly as a psychotherapist of many, many years, is that violence never solves anything. It
mhm,
just traumatizes people.
mhm,
And it usually results in more violence. Either, so if a person has received violence, they often enact that violence toward themselves
mhm,
and or toward other people or toward animals or toward nature.
mhm.
Um, we we kind of do what we've learned,
Yeah,
and in our own lives, and this goes back also to the disconnect. None of us want somebody to come into our home and take our children.
right.
None of us want someone to bomb our house as collateral damage in their war,
Mhm,
right? None of us want that, but we agree to do that to other people.
mhm,
And I think part of that is because, as a mental health issue, rather than a partisan or ideological issue, we have been conditioned to believe that other people deserve that treatment.
mhm.
Or it's too bad that, innocent people died in that apartment building where we killed the so and so. Well, is it really okay? If it was us, would it be okay? We were horrified when 9/11 happened,
Mhm,
horrified that that could happen to innocent people in the Twin Towers in New York City. And yet, how many wars have we waged where thousands and thousands of people die who have nothing to do with the war itself? So that it really is a mental health issue because I say it this way. It's a mental health issue because mentally healthy people don't kill each other.
yes,
Healthy people don't discriminate. They don't starve other people. They don't steal their resources. They don't make them slaves. They
I
don't
love what you're saying.
wipe out a whole,
Mhm,
race or religion. They don't do that. And so, and when if somebody did that in our neighborhood, we would say they were mentally ill.
mhm,
right?
Exactly. And I gotta say, when you mentioned the Twin Towers, we were um, not just upset or angry or traumatized, we were appalled. We were even, how dare they? And
Right.
American soil and all this stuff. But we don't think about when we're going over to another country and wreaking havoc, we're not, you know what it is? We're not putting on someone else's moccasins.
That's right. That's exactly right. And
And
I think
go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say one quick thing, and that is, when I was a kid, I remember in one of my classes, I don't remember, one of my elementary school classes, they would put a saying on the board, and we would have to write a little essay about the saying. And the one that there's two that I remember. One was, don't judge a book by its cover.
Mhm.
We had to write something. But the other one was, do unto others as you would have them do unto you. And
Absolutely.
to me, if we were living that, we would be a world at peace. We would feel our brotherhood with everyone. We would be getting along. We would be sharing. We would be caring, and we'd be safe.
Yes. When I was listening to you, a saying that I have came to mind. We hear people say, hurt people,
Hurt
hurting
people.
people hurt people. And then I said, adding to that, heal healed people help
Yep.
people.
I love that. I
and that's
love that. And that's true.
and that's the premise of this show, in fact.
That's
I'm
right.
looking for people who have learned things in life and they're okay with sharing it with other people free of cost. This is just knowledge I've gained.
Right.
Um, and I want to help the world become a better place. I want to help people
Absolutely.
in little ways as I can. Now I don't know everything. That's why I get great people like you to come on and help me share.
Right.
um,
Because none of us knows it all. Nobody
Absolutely.
does. Right.
Absolutely. But it's so true what you said. I've seen that in my own life. A person who's not jealous and envious, they're not going to try to tear another person down because they feel healthy and whole within themselves. And they
Exactly.
see that it's room to lift another person up. They're okay in their own skin. So it's
Right.
okay for me to be happy for you.
Oh, I love that. And I just want to go back to your original words, healed people help heal other people. And what I've seen is it's a natural impulse. If I've gotten a chance to heal a wound in myself, I automatically and naturally and organically want to give that away. And
Mhm.
I've seen that with so many people, just like the person I referenced before who worked on her own childhood wound, and she became a different manager in that office because she recognized the harm that she had been doing, and she
Mhm.
recognized the value of being acknowledged and being inclusive. And
Right.
she just automatically wanted to give it away. And we hear, like in the field of addiction, for instance, so many people who have been in recovery become addictions counselors because they want to help other people recover.
Mhm.
And that's the beauty of, like, the ripple effect that we can have even if we don't know it.
Yeah. That's it, and it's so important. Um, and then I think it becomes reciprocal. Um, you between the other person or people, but also it's reciprocal in a different way. It's like that gift you gave out comes back to you. It feels so good to
It
be a
feels so good.
person who helps other people. And so, in a way, it's helping you continue to heal.
Absolutely. I Absolutely. I think it's one thing. The gift we give ourselves becomes the gift we give others, becomes the gift that comes back to us,
Mhm.
right?
Yeah. So, so we talked about the correlation between personal pain and country pain and the importance of diagnosing and getting help for ourselves so we can have hope for future America. And I know now we're getting even more specifically around your book. So I kind of want to be quiet myself. And I gave you those words to think about, but start telling us just a little bit more. What do you want us to know about this book and how it can be helpful? And I think through you sharing that, we're inspiring people to want to get your book.
Well, thank you. And because I really hope that, because I feel like what I learned really is of value because I've seen it be of value in the microcosm, which is the individual or the individual family or the couple. And so basically, what I did in America in therapy is I look at America as a client.
Hmm.
What's your history? What are the traumas that we've sustained as a country? How did we cope? But not only because a lot of people who came here, many of the original settlers and over hundreds of years, well, not hundreds, a couple of 100 years, have been people fleeing war, fleeing poverty, fleeing religious persecution, fleeing discrimination. And then, of course, there were people who were brought here against their will, the slaves. And then there were the Native Americans who we tried to wipe out so we could take their land. So we have both the traumas that we brought with us and we have the traumas that we've inflicted on other people. And that's kind of what you deal with in therapy. And you try to deal with it from a non-judgmental, non-blaming, non-shaming point of view, but just the point of view to try to understand what conditioned us to be now who we are and behave the way we do, so that if some of what we're doing is dysfunctional or harmful to ourselves or to other people, we can actually experience a choice to change the way that we're behaving and the way we're treating other people. So I sort of talk to the Statue of Liberty as if she's my client. And in the course of that, I talk not only about our history and some of what we have, good things that we've done also,
Yeah.
because most of us have done lots of good things as well as acted out some of our unconscious wounding. Um, but then I talk about what are the dynamics of a dysfunctional family? What are the dynamics of an abusive family? What are the symptoms people have when they're hurt by other people and they don't have a chance to escape or to heal or get treatment? I talk about how victimizers or abusers will blame their victims and then they blame them for their symptoms and they punish truth tellers and silence people or reward people for being complicit with their abuse.
Hmm.
I talk about the symptoms being depression, anxiety, addiction, isolation, aggression, sometimes violent aggression, becoming more, rigid and discriminatory yourself. I talk about learned helplessness and identification with the aggressor. There's just all kinds of symptoms that we're manifesting more and more as a society because we haven't looked at ourselves through a mental health lens and committed to that kind of level of healing. And then I spend the rest of the book talking about, so I really go into the dynamics, again, not for shame and blame or hating anyone, but to understand,
Yeah.
because I don't think our psychology is common knowledge.
Right.
I don't.
Hmm.
And then the rest of the book is really devoted to, okay, what are the healing principles? What are nonviolent communication skills? And what does peaceful conflict resolution look like?
Hmm.
What does it mean to stop blaming and actually take responsibility for ourselves?
Hmm.
How can we move out of this? I talk about several paradigms that I think need to shift and are shifting with some people, but maybe not enough yet.
Right.
And one of the big ones is the win-lose paradigm. I
Mm.
think we need to move from a win-lose paradigm to a win-win.
Yeah.
And that's what therapy's all about.
Hmm.
You know, we win the relationship, we win a healthy family back, we win self-love back, rather than I'm right and you're wrong, I win, you lose, you have to do what I say, you have to be quiet,
And that's
whatever.
what was seen in your client that you shared, the example that you shared earlier. The
Exactly.
win-win.
It's a win-win.
She's better. The people around her are better
Right,
because of the work that she did.
right,
But we also have to be willing to to look at it, to see it, to change, even the things
right.
that's painful or hard to look at.
Right. And we do that best in an atmosphere that both holds us accountable for what we have done, but is also compassionate with the roots of that kind of dysfunction.
Yeah.
And the goal is healing. The
Hmm.
goal is not punishment. The goal is healing.
You
Um,
know, I
Go ahead.
like the way you talk about these things because I can't get out of my head the micro to the macro. I think anyone who's honest with themselves about their individual experiences, you've made it so easy to have us relate our individual or personal stuff and then use that as a springboard to look
Right,
at this bigger picture. And I think that's brilliant because I understand it when it comes down to me, when it comes down to an individual. But opening my eyes to say, oh my goodness, she's absolutely right. It's it's happening on a much larger scale. And if we
right,
all take the time to look at it and just know that to some extent we're all contributing to this larger scale.
right.
We're all bringing our own trauma from
Totally.
whatever vantage point and whatever position. And if the goal is we want to heal, we have to hear each other out and we have to want to arrive at a better place for everyone.
And I love what you said, the last thing you said about hearing each other out, because we don't do that.
Mm-hmm.
Just shout each other down right now. And in the best therapy, if a couple comes to therapy, one of the big things that we do is help them hear each other, help them restrain their automatic, defense or interrupting or passive aggressive response, like rolling your eyes or slamming the door or whatever, and really listen the way we want to be heard. And we have not adopted that as a culture. We're really into right and wrong, good and bad. And that's the win-lose paradigm.
And I think
Because
we're
everybody
stuck,
thinks they're right,
yeah.
right?
I think we're stuck too in what we said about previous generations, numb to
Really.
the pain, don't even want to deal with the pain, um, rather not look at it. It's too hard
Right,
to look at.
right.
Um, so I think it's a lot of work that still needs to be done to cultivate the soil to even be ready to receive the seed, so to speak. I think
Agree.
we're
And
that.
I've had clients who've said to me, this is just too much work.
Mm,
Or I feel like if I dive into that level of pain, I'll never come out.
mm,
What I usually say is, first of all, I've never worked with anybody who dove into the traumas of their life and didn't come out the other side. Because when you're in a safe place and you can reprocess the negativity that you've absorbed and the poor role models for functioning that you've done the best to survive with that you can,
yeah.
you do come out the other side if you stick with it and you do the work and you're in a safe place and a non-judgmental place to do that. Um, but the other thing I've said to people who've said this is just too much work, I've said, well, how much work are you expending now in
Oh,
the dysfunction
that's
that you're suffering,
that's so true. And then that's true again. What you just said is making me think on the macro level. Some of that is the wars that we're facing. That's
Totally
terribly painful and dysfunctional and um, hurt. I think that's a great,
terrible.
yeah,
Yeah,
example of what you're talking about.
yeah.
You said when we were talking that dysfunctional people create a dysfunctional country. And boy, don't we all have to pay for it.
Hmm. Yeah,
We all have some degree of dysfunction, but when you have dysfunction plus power,
that's right.
dysfunction plus untold wealth, there's like no limit to how far your dysfunction can go. It's not that we don't all have dysfunction, our ability to express it is,
Right. Magnified many
yeah.
times.
Mhm.
Yes. No, that's absolutely true. And one of the things that I thought was really interesting that I learned being a therapist, and I don't remember most of what I learned being a therapist, I did not learn in graduate school, although graduate school was good, and I did learn a lot. But a lot of it you just sort of learn on the ground with real people, right? And I used to work a lot with children in the beginning of my practice. And then what I realized was the children were just the symptom bearers for the family dysfunction and the family, and usually the parents are who really needed the therapy. But I had a couple of kids, little kids, under 5, who were brought to therapy because they were completely out of control.
Mm,
I had one little child that was chasing his siblings around with a knife. I had another little child who would never go to bed. She just wouldn't do anything that her parents said. She'd be up till like 12 o'clock. Nobody could get her to go to bed. And basically, what it was the both sets of parents, they were not abusive.
mhm,
They did not have any idea how to set limits and boundaries with their children,
mhm,
and they were afraid of their child's upset. So they would just weather it and, like, well, she'll eventually fall asleep, even though it was midnight and everybody was awake and, she was causing havoc in the family or the little boy who was running around with a knife. Um, so they weren't mean people. They just didn't know how to set limits and boundaries. And it's a good example of what you're talking about. When children and adults don't have a limit or a boundary around their power,
mhm,
around what they can do,
mhm,
they become like these monsters. And these little children, it's like goodness knows what would have happened to them. And I think there's many children in the world like that now, whose parents just really don't know how to make those limits and boundaries, who become completely out of control.
mhm,
And and they actually feel unsafe.
mhm,
They actually feel unsafe inside. You wouldn't know that.
mhm.
But imagine them growing up and knowing no limits and boundaries.
Right.
They're not safe people.
Right. Yeah, exactly. I was thinking while you were sharing, when you gave a real example about little children, but at the end of the day, we all have a little kid inside of us that's still trying
Right.
to figure out some stuff.
Totally.
So
Totally.
you said that it's never too late to heal. Briefly share a little bit about that, and then I
Yeah.
have a one final question that I ask all my guests.
I mean, I would say it's never too late to heal if you want to.
Mm,
There's
mhm.
people who don't want to, and
Yeah.
that's a different story. But I don't think it's ever too late to heal if you have that desire, because that desire will carry you a really long way, especially if you have help. And I think a lot of us don't heal alone. Most of us really need someone to guide us, someone to be there when we're in the worst of it, someone to hold the light at the end of the tunnel. But yes, I think healing is absolutely possible if you want it. And if you have, help.
I agree. And I think also, while I think in my own experience with healing, some of it happened just me and my own thoughts and
Right.
with God. But then there's people who have been helpful uh, to me in the process as well. And I think one of the things that's really helpful about that is you do need an outside eye. You don't always analyze yourself correctly.
Right.
So having that outside eye that can help you see something that maybe you're not seeing,
Right.
um, I think that's the benefit of that.
And I do want to say, like, I agree with you. I think you don't, it doesn't have to always be with another person. I do think that outside help for most of us is part of the process.
Mhm,
And there's inside help,
mhm,
really looking for your own guidance. Maybe it's your faith, maybe it's your love for an animal that opens something up inside of you, or your love of nature, or just being somebody who's of service to others. There's lots of healing ways to heal.
mhm,
But my experience is with the deepest traumas, we really do need somebody else.
mhm. Very good. So I ask every student, what am I saying? I ask every guest this last question, and it's simply this. Let's imagine the whole audience forgets everything we just said, this fabulous conversation we just had. What's the one thing you'd say, but don't forget this one thing?
Yeah, I mean, I would just say, if you're really hurting, get some help somewhere.
Mm,
Don't feel like you have to white knuckle it alone, or, try to show the world, a great face when you're really hurting inside. Reach out to safe people. But the other thing I would say is that we all have a contribution to make. Every single person is born an essential, innocent, beautiful soul inside whatever, hurt that they've received that maybe has covered that up. And you deserve to be able to live your best self. And we need you. we need everybody's best self here. And if you feel like your contribution is really small and it's not like, you're not having a world impact or you can't change your whole community or whatever, it doesn't matter. Every gift of your best self to the people or the animals or nature around you is of service, and don't diminish that.
That's great. Thank you for those words. So now we're at the point where I ask, what would you like the audience to know about you in terms of how they can stay connected with you, get your book, anything you want them to know about speaking engagements or anything like that?
Yeah, I'm available for speaking engagements. I love to talk on podcasts. Best place to contact me is through my website, which is my name, www.phyllisleavitt.com. And you can buy my book there. You can buy it on Amazon and Barnes and Noble and any major booksellers. And just really to know that um, there's what I wrote in terms of American therapy, you can apply to your own life. I
Mhm.
have lots of case studies of individual people's stories, my own stories, plus professional observation of what's going on in the larger, world around us and in our country. So it's all really applicable. I've just created a course that goes along with my book, if you sign up for my newsletter, I will make, many free offerings available to you. So please feel free to contact me. I'm happy to talk to anybody. And I'm on all the social media. I have videos on YouTube and I'm on LinkedIn and Facebook and Twitter and all that stuff. But the best place to look me up really is my website.
Wonderful. Thanks for sharing that. I have to tell you, I've thoroughly enjoyed this conversation, and I'm so happy that you wanted to be on my show. And I really like what you're doing here in terms of us getting us to look at the big picture. And I really like how you explained that you looked at America and using the Statue of Liberty as like a client. And
Hmm.
that's very interesting to think of it that way. So I hope that the audience has been turned on and that that's really hooked their attention as well. So again, thanks for being such a wonderful guest, and it's been my
Thank you for
pleasure.
being such a wonderful hostess. I really appreciate the conversation. I love what you talk about, and I'm really honored to be on your show. Thank you so much.
Ah, thank you.